Okay, good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Thursday, November 5th, the day, well, I guess 2 days after the election, or 2 days after the election. Seems like it's been a lot longer. Time has no meaning anymore. So if anyone's been watching the results, what's that? He's winning. The votes are trickling in very slowly. It's going to be. He's still in the lead. Yeah, he's got 264 electoral votes. He needs 270. If he wins Nevada, he's good. But he has a razor-thin lead in Nevada. I think he leads by like 8,000 votes or something, which is not that much. So I think it'll probably go his way eventually, but 6. So that gives him exactly what he needs.
Did he get Michigan?
I think he did get Michigan. Yeah. But it's, everybody's still on the edge of their seat waiting for some kind of final announcement, and then what happens when we get that announcement. Well, I would say he's already in that camp. He's not going to go there. He's been living there for some time. He has a house and a garden. And
I was going to go further in.
You were going to go further?
Yeah.
Oh, he's going to go further into that? Yeah, it could be. I don't know. Nobody knows what to expect. Some Democracywatch organizations apparently have moved their little needle to like preparing for a coup. So I don't think that's going to happen, of course, but there is lots of questionable stuff happening here, right? In terms of, questioning the election and trying to declare it invalid and trying to get people to stop counting votes, even though the votes were legally cast. And I think so. I was reading it this morning. I think in the Globe and Mail, but I forget where exactly I read it. But there are some kind of organizations that are, at the very least, kind of pointing the finger at this and saying, "Holy cow, this is irregular and problematic behavior." Right? You are supposed to respect the electoral process, right? And the electoral process is supposed to be nonpartisan, right? So the people who run the elections are supposed to be kind of well separated from political parties, right? You don't want one political party controlling the electoral process. That's not good, right? So here in Canada, we have like Elections BC and Elections Canada, and they kind of operate at arm's length from the government. And so you don't want people manipulating that.
What do these organizations do?
They're just kind of like a non-profit organization that sort of advocates for democracy around the world.
So say I don't want on Charlton and going to station.
Well, let's have a look. Let's have a look, okay? Democracywatch.org, maybe. So here we go. Yeah, so hang on a sec here. Yeah, so without your Democracy Watch can't win key changes to stop governments and big business from abusing their power and hurting you and your family. So this is who they are, and there's a few like this, but basically they're an advocacy group, right? So they're a nonprofit. They spread information about democracy and infringements on the democratic process. So here, I don't see anything about the U.S. election. Anyway, maybe I won't spend any more time on it just because I haven't actually pulled up the website and I don't have anything to show you, so I don't want to spend 10 minutes of me looking through websites. But there are organizations out there that advocate for democracy and kind of spread information about the sort of safeguarding democracy and when things happen that we should be worried about. And so again, when some of the things we see happening in the United States here are very worrisome, right? When you have one group of people saying, no, we feel it's a rigged election, it's a fraud, it's, you know, we should have won, but we didn't, and, you know, they're trying to stop ballot counting, and that's all super bad news, right? You really need to, you know, if you respect democracy, you have to respect the electoral process, right? And whatever the people decide, that's what the people decide. And we talked about that yesterday, where I think we said democracy requires the consent of the losers. Did I say that? Maybe not yesterday, but at some point. Maybe I said it in my other class. But it does, right? And so democracy only works if the people who lose a vote or lose an election say, okay, that's the will of the people or of the assembly, and you move on, right? But if if things don't go your way, if the vote doesn't go your way, and then you take steps to invalidate the vote or seize power anyway, that's not really democracy, right? That's something else. Yeah, that's something else, right? That's subversion or destruction of democracy. But I don't know. I think it's going to turn out okay down there. It looks like things are headed the right way. It's a lot closer than I thought it would be, which is a little disturbing, and I don't know. I think they've got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do down there. Good morning. Before we sort of get rolling here, let me just put up all of my boxes here. Who's here? Who's here this morning? Lots of people are here. Michaela's here. Good morning, Michaela. Mike's here. Good morning. Ayushi's here. Hello, Ayushi. Ashley's here. Good morning, Ashley. Kevin's here. Hello, Kevin. Good morning, Ananda. Adil's here. Good morning to you, sir. Ty's here. Good morning. Rafin is here. Hello to you. Hadil is here. Good morning. Shania is here. Hi, Shania. And Ryan is here. Hello, Ryan. And John is here. Good morning, John. And Siobhan is here. Good morning to you. Is that everybody? That is everybody. Okay. So, what were we talking about yesterday? Oh, yes. Talking about the Russian Revolution, right, and the significance of it. And so I asked you to read an article, What If the Russian Revolution had never happened? And in it, of course, the author, I guess, said a few kind of important things, right? So there were kind of three broad chunks to this article. One was kind of the unlikeliness of the revolution happening in the first place. The second was how different the modern world, an imagining maybe of how different the modern world might be without the Russian Revolution. And then just a little kind of tagline at the end, which talked about the fact that the Russian government did not celebrate or did not even mark, maybe you don't have to celebrate, with a party, but did not even mark the 100th anniversary of this event a few years ago, even though it was wildly significant to global history, but specifically to Russian history, right? It looked like Russia was headed toward maybe a republic or a democracy, and then, the track got switched and they went off into this whole kind of communist socialist experiment, right? So that totally changed the sort of course of Russian history. Huge event, and yet nothing from the Russian government, right? So, as a very quick recap, why was this revolution unlikely to succeed, according to the author? What's that? I want all of it. Shower me with right answers. Or any answers.
Assassination attempts on Lenin.
Right, so Lenin was almost assassinated, but survived.
The stupidity of the White Army. They couldn't coordinate, nor could they get help from the outside.
Right, so after the Bolsheviks take power, kind of a resistance force assembles themselves, the White Army, and they fight the Bolsheviks, trying to kick them out of power, but they fail because they're not very organized.
The Tsars could have started the reform
Yeah, this was, in some ways, this revolution or change was a long time coming, right? And the Tsar and the provisional government had a long time to make changes to sort of, you know, calm the people down and sort of make them a little happier. But nobody really was able to do anything, or there was no interest in doing anything. What else?
The provisional government didn't just arrest the land or shot him dead.
Right, so the provisional government did succeed in kicking Lenin out of the country, right? They labeled him a German spy and they got rid of him. He was although they felt he was a revolutionary and he was endangering the government, which of course he was and he did. But he sneaks back in, right? And so it would have been a good idea for the government to try to hunt him down and arrest him or kill him or something, but they weren't able to catch him in time, right? So what else?
They were really bad at storming buildings.
They were really bad at storming buildings. As it turns out, they were, right? They weren't a hardened military force, the Red Army at this point. They were just a bunch of guys with guns, right? And so they stormed the Winter Palace and the government buildings, and they are successful in kind of taking over those buildings and jailing all of the provisional government, but it takes some time, right? And as I said, the longer this kind of thing takes, the more your chances of success decline, right? You want total surprise, and you want to round up everyone quickly and throw them in jail and take control. You don't want it to take like a week. That's bad. If you ever take over the government, especially you, B, if you ever take over the government, make sure that you take over the government buildings really quickly and jail all your opponents immediately, okay? Maybe even execute them. Then they won't be any trouble to you.
Have Mike in your team?
Yes, I've been teaching students how to be dictators for quite some time now. So, yeah, that's terrifying. Okay, what else?
I don't think the author said this, but oh wait, no, there's something else. When the time was right for the revolution, Lenin was Switzerland, Stalin was Siberia, and Trotsky was all the way out.
Right. So there's this kind of potentially maybe ideal moment, right, where the Tsar has stepped down, and this might be the perfect opportunity for the Bolsheviks to swoop in, but all of their leaders are kind of out of the country doing other things, right? So whoops, missed their opportunity, right? And maybe one more. Maybe one more. Had to do with the Bolshevik Party internally.
Oh wait.
Yeah, they didn't agree on the same thing, right? So when Lenin shows up back from Switzerland, back from his ski holiday, when he shows up back in Russia and he meets with the Bolsheviks are like, okay, here's our plan. We're gonna cooperate with the provisional government and try and get them to go along with what we want. And Lenin's like, no, that's not the plan at all. We're gonna overthrow the government, right? And so he has to kind of convince his own party members that that's the right thing to do. And so there's always a chance that he wouldn't have been persuasive, right? That they would have said, no, Lenin, you're crazy. We're just gonna cooperate, which is probably the more reasonable thing to do. But again, Lenin's a forceful.
And probably wasn't that friendly.
He wasn't what?
That friendly there.
He wasn't that friendly? No, I imagine he wasn't. I imagine he was a pretty intense, pretty unpleasant character, I would say. Again, I don't know a huge amount about him personally, but from what I've read, he's not the nicest guy, right? So yeah, this revolution that changed the course of the 20th century really wasn't destined to happen at all, right? It's a bit of a fluke, right? There's a lot of different things that could have gone wrong and might have resulted in this revolution never happening in the first place. But everything goes right or goes wrong, depending on how you want to see it. But everything goes right, and Lenin manages to get himself installed as the leader of Russia, right? And so again, what What things, if the Russian Revolution doesn't happen, what other things in the 20th century don't happen? Huh? No Cold War, right? The Cold War basically defines the second half of the 20th century, right? That's what's going on, the Cold War. And
No NATO.
no Cold War, no NATO, right? We haven't got there yet, but NATO is created to oppose the Soviet Union and the Warsaw, well, actually the Warsaw Pact comes after, to oppose the Soviet Union. And so, yeah, no NATO.
No kicking the butts of Nazis.
Yeah, maybe no Nazi butt kicking, and maybe no Nazis in general, right? So the author kind of argues that Hitler used the Bolshevik Revolution to inspire fear in Germany. No revolution, maybe he's less inspiring, right? Maybe he's less effective at convincing the Germans that there's something to fear. Maybe he doesn't gain power the way that he does in our reality. Right. So maybe the Holocaust doesn't happen, right?
And I think Hitler would have rose to power anyway. Germany was ruined. Jews were still there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
He came up and said, "I want to kill the Jews."
Maybe. That's hard to know. Maybe Germany doesn't become the kind of prominent sort of political and industrial power that it is right now in Europe, right? Because Hitler kind of makes Germany great again, right? But what if Hitler doesn't make Germany great? What if nobody makes Germany great? Then what? We haven't got here yet either, but Israel, the state of Israel, is created in part as a response to the Holocaust, to give Jewish people kind of a safe homeland to live in. No Holocaust, maybe no Israel.
Israel, less place for us to chant that to.
Right. Iran might have to find another enemy, another mortal enemy, right?
Maybe you're gonna go to France.
Sure. Yeah, take your pick. There's lots of other countries to to vilify. What else? What else doesn't happen?
No communist China.
No communist China. That's a huge one, right? Especially now when, as I say, China is a big, increasingly powerful, increasingly wealthy country flexing its muscles on the world stage. No communist China.
No Cuban Missile Crisis.
No Cuban Missile Crisis. No nuclear arms race.
No space.
Maybe no Putin's Russia, right? Putin's Russia is built on the ruins of the Soviet experiment, right? No Soviet Union, no Putin. So Russia, who knows what Russia looks like in that reality. So, and again, all of the biggest puzzle pieces of the 20th century without this revolution are gone, right? And again, I don't even know how you begin to imagine what the world looks like without this event, because so many things are connected to it. And again, interestingly, it's not a given, right? It's almost a bit of it was a long shot, right? It was a long shot of success, and somehow it happens, and massive changes as a result, right? So the last thing, and I think we didn't get to this question yesterday, but why wasn't Russia, well, maybe not celebrating, but at least marking the anniversary of this revolution, given that it is so important? Why don't they say anything?
I think we asked that question, and the answer was that Putin didn't really like the idea of the 1917 revolution stuff. He liked the idea of the 1945 victory.
Yeah.
So maybe in 25 years we'll see him glorifying that.
Right. So all nations, all countries have to tell themselves a story about who they are, right? So it helps to kind of sort of put the country on track to the future. It helps to bind the citizens together in some sort of shared identity of who they are and where they're going. And who kind of creates that narrative? Who creates that story? Usually. Yeah, the government usually has a very strong hand in trying to channel that story, right? Who are we? And we hear that story over and over again. We hear that kind of bedtime story, maybe on our national holidays, on our country's birthday, whenever it is, right? Whether it's Russia Day or Canada Day or the 4th of July or whatever holiday we might have, we always hear the bedtime story, right? The story of who we are as a country. To some extent, we'll hear that story a little bit here in Canada next week on November 11th, because that's Remembrance Day, when we remember our war dead, right? And so connected to that story is the story of who Canada is and what Canada has been through and who we are in the world, in the kind of the world ecosystem, right? Fireworks? No, I think that would be, I think explosions would be a little, I don't think we would celebrate war dead with more explosions. I think that'd be weird. So there's no fireworks as far as I know. But yeah, so the government creates this story, and here Putin is doing the same thing. But in Putin's Russia, the author is saying he's almost a modern day czar, right? Because Russia looks like a democracy, but really it's not, right? He is firmly in control of this democratic machine, and it does what Putin wants it to do. And so does he want to tell the country a story of where the people overthrew the czar and overthrew the government? No, right? That's not a story that Putin wants. Putin doesn't want to hear stories of, the power being overthrown. He wants to tell a story of Russia's greatness, right? So he sort of leans back toward the czars, right? Nicholas, but also they mention Alexander III and Peter the Great, right? He wants to found Russia on those things, and also on Stalin's Russia too. And Stalin's Soviet Union is brutal and awful, but it's also a world superpower, right? Stalin's Soviet Union is something to be feared and reckoned with, right? And that's the Russia that Putin wants. Putin doesn't want the Russia where the government gets overthrown. Like that's not what the story he wants to tell, right? He wants to tell the story of Russia's greatness, and specifically of Russia's greatness when there's one guy in power, because that's him, right? So again, maybe it's not surprising that this event really isn't marked in any way in Putin's Russia, because again, it's not part of the story that he wants to tell, right? So it's interesting how significant this event is, and yet Putin has decided we're not going to mark it because it doesn't tell the story I want it to tell, right? Does that make sense? A little bit? Okay. All right. Oops. Oh, before we do that, or no? No. Can we not do it? No, we must. Do it, we must. So this section here, and for online people, I've just got to get this into Microsoft Teams because I don't think I have it there. In this section, what we'll read about is what happens after Lenin comes to power. And so, of course, pardon me, there's this Bolshevik revolution. His Bolsheviks storm the Winter Palace and government buildings. They throw all the opponents in jail. They take control of Russia, and Russia is theirs, right? But then they're going to have to start to implement changes. And so in this section, you'll hear a little bit about what Lenin and the Bolsheviks do the first few years they're in power. Spoiler alert, they'll be fighting a civil war. But after that, what they do. And then we'll hear about the death of Lenin too, because as we mentioned, he's not going to live very long, right? He's only going to be kind of in power for 6 years. He's going to have a series of strokes, and that's going to limit his ability to, speak and to be effective in the party. And so we'll learn about that, and then we'll kind of transition into his awful successor, Joseph Stalin. But that's what this section is about. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give you about, I'll put 12 minutes, I'll put 13 minutes on the clock because I've got 13 minutes here. I'll let you start reading and answering some questions. And for online people, this will show up in Microsoft Teams in just a couple of minutes, okay? All right, let's go. Okay, online people, the reading that you need should be in Microsoft Teams now. Sorry about that. Okay, hardworking people. Maybe let's take a little bit of a break, and then we'll come back. We'll just take a few more minutes with this, and then we'll answer some questions, okay? All right. Hello, people. Welcome. Welcome back. Let me just adjust something here. Okay. So hopefully that's enough time to read. Maybe we came up a little bit short, but we'll talk through some of these questions and see what we've learned. So this section kind of starts off with the Bolsheviks seizing power, as we've already, no more time. Seizing power as we've already discussed, right? And so again, the provisional government is kind of arguing back and forth. Lenin thinks he sees his moment. He thinks he's got the support of the people, which to some degree he does. He thinks he has the support of the Soviets, which he also has. And so he makes his move, storms the Winter Palace and government buildings, arrests the provisional government, and seizes control, right? Let me just see what my questions are here before I ask you similar or other questions. Or 11. Oh, right. So what's kind of the first thing that Lenin has to deal with once he's gained power, or one of the first things? Huh? Something to do with the peasants? What's wrong with the peasants? They were hungry. They'd been hungry for some time, right? Let's deal with sort of military issues first. But you're right. The peasants continued to be hungry. Poor peasants.
So they had the Germans hungry.
Right. So that was so Lenin's first promise was peace, right? And so what does he have to do? Get out of the war, right? So he and his kind of foreign minister or minister of war or whatever you want to call him, Leon Trotsky, they managed to, Foreign minister. They managed to negotiate a peace treaty with the Germans. Is it a good treaty?
No, Trotsky doesn't like it. He says no to Brest, which has some harsh terms.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Germans move in, then they give them even harsher terms, and the Russians like, whatever.
Yeah, it's a bad deal, right? So this Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, if you will, is not the best peace treaty for the Russians. As you see, they lose all kinds of land and railway and coal and mining resources, which of course they could very much use, right? They're totally in debt and they're poor and they have no food. So all of those things would be super handy, right? But unfortunately, they lose these in the treaty. But as they mentioned in the textbook, Lenin is not really in a great position to negotiate, and he wants out of that war. And so the Russians make a bad deal here, but at least they're out, right? But the fighting is not over, because then what happens? Right, and not the white people. They were white. It's true, they were white, but that's not why they're white, right? There's a white army, and who's kind of in this white army? Yep. I think there's some social revolutionaries. There's basically anyone and everyone who doesn't like the Bolsheviks, right? And so we've got people who are fighting for democracy and republics. We've got people who are fighting to put the czar back in. We've got people who are just trying to overthrow the nature of society anyway. And so all of these weird people are collected together in one group opposing the Bolsheviks, right? So the Bolsheviks have to fight a civil war with these guys for a few years. Who's gonna win? Who's gonna win that?
I don't know. Does it turn out to be red Russia or the flag?
Well, the flag is red, right? So I don't know.
Let's say the whites win.
The white people win, but in this case, it's the Bolsheviks, right? The Bolsheviks are the ones who are going to come out on top, right? As the textbook mentioned, the whites are kind of disorganized. They don't actually get along very well because they're actually fighting for different things, right? You've got people who want a democracy fighting right alongside people who want to put the czar back in and have a monarchy, right? So they don't agree on a lot of things. The peasants don't support them because the peasants think that the White Army is trying to turn things back to the way things were under the czar, which the peasants definitely don't want. And so they don't have a lot of support. They're not organized, they're not united. And after a couple of years or a few years of fighting, that's over. And again, the Bolsheviks emerge triumphant, if you will, right? So finally, the Bolsheviks and Lenin can get down to the business of communism, right? And so this is question number 11 here. What does Lenin starts to try to nationalize agriculture? What on earth does that mean? What does it mean when he's nationalizing agriculture?
So land doesn't belong to a certain people, it belongs to everyone.
Right. So nationalizing agriculture means taking all the land and sort of putting it under the ownership of the state, right? So the state now owns all of the land. Now, but the peasants wanted land reform, right? But what did they want? Especially, but based on what you read here, but based on what we've said already, what did they want? They wanted land, peace, bread, but did they want to own their own land? They did, right? They wanted the ability to own their own farms because none of them did, right? It was all owned by the aristocracy, right? The nobles, the upper class, the dukes and duchesses and whatever else, right? So the peasants were kind of fighting because they wanted the ability to own land, right? They wanted their own little farm that they could work, right? And they could harvest from the land and then they could sell the profits of their work and hopefully make some cash, right? Because they were totally dirt poor and that's not fun. Right? But then what happens? Lenin turns around and what does he do?
He says, no one owns anything.
Yeah, don't worry, everything is owned by the state, and you're the state, so you own all the land. But is that really what the peasants wanted? Whoops. Yeah. So he promised land reform, and he promised that the people would own the land. And is that true? Sort of. From a particular point of view, it is, right? But from another point of view, it's not, right? Because people wanted, the peasants wanted, they wanted this to be my land, right? This is my land, this is my farm. But that's not at all what happened, right? So, whoops. Lenin promised land reform, and he said that the people would own the land. And again, that's sort of true, but also sort of not, especially if you're a peasant. It's very much sort of not true, right? Right, so what is he trying to do, though, when he nationalizes agriculture? When he takes control of all agriculture under the control of the state? What's he trying to do? Yeah, and how is that going to happen? They use a particular term here. Right, so he's going to try and collectivize farms. What does that mean? Don't know? If you had to guess based on just what that word sounds like, what do you think it means? That's basically what it is, right? So when you collect things, you kind of bring a bunch of things together, right? And that's what Lenin's trying to do. Instead of a bunch of serfs, a bunch of peasants working their own little farms, he's saying, okay, now all your little farms are one big farm, and you all work on it together, right? So what he's trying to do is, they use a term called economies of scale. Do you know what that means? Economies of scale? No? Economies of scale are where the bigger something gets, the more efficient it becomes, right? So imagine I own a little grocery store, okay? So just maybe down the street, I own a little, it's convenient sized grocery store. It's very tiny, right? I have to have somebody who works there, and I have to have somebody who does the ordering, and then I need kind of like an accountant to keep the books and make sure people get paid and all that stuff, right? So I have to hire those people. So I make a certain amount of profit, but it also costs me a certain amount to run my business because I've got to pay these people to do all this stuff. Now, if I open a second location, right, I'll have to hire another person to work in the store, right, to do the cash and things like that. But can I use the same person to do the accounting and the payroll and stuff like that? Yeah, right, I can. And can the same person who does the ordering for the first store do the ordering for the second store? Yeah. So that might be a little cheaper because instead of actually having to hire one whole person, now I can have one person doing the job for 2 stores. What if I open a few more, right? And suddenly they start to do the ordering for all of the stores and the payroll for all of the stores. Is that more efficient for me? Absolutely, right? The bigger I get, the more I buy, right? So instead of buying, 20 boxes of Fruit Loops a week, now I'm buying 200 boxes of Fruit Loops a week, right? And the more I buy, do you think it's cheaper for me? Do you think the manufacturer gives me a better price the more I buy? Absolutely, right? So the bigger I get, the more efficient I become, and the more my overhead starts to decrease, right? And this is why kind of big box stores like Best Buy or Walmart or whatever, or Superstore, that's why they're able to be so cheap, is because they're huge, right? And so when Walmart buys Fruit Loops, Walmart doesn't buy 200 boxes a week, they buy like millions of boxes a week, right? And so they get a fantastic price, a much better price than me at my little corner grocery store can get. So not only are they efficient because they're so large, they probably buy a computer system that does all their payroll, which is even more efficient, but they get a much lower price on their goods, right? And so they can sell them for cheaper. And so again, the bigger you get, the more efficient you can become. And that's what Lenin's trying to do here, except with a farm. He's trying to make them bigger so that they become more efficient and more organized, right? But do the peasants like this idea?
No.
No, they don't. Why don't they like it? Who wouldn't like efficiency?
Someone who likes their own land.
What's that?
Someone who likes their own land.
Some people like their own land, and they don't want to work on someone else's farm. They want to work on their own. Why? Yeah, they've been working on someone else's farm all their lives, right? They wanted to get rid of the czar so they could have a chance to own their own land, right? To have their own house, grow their own food, sell it, and maybe make some extra money. That's what they wanted. That's the dream, right? But are they going to get this, apparently? Looks like they're not, right? It looks like basically nothing has changed for the peasants. Now they're just working on a bigger farm that doesn't belong to them. And what happens to the harvest? What are they supposed to do with the harvest? Yeah, give it up and just hand it over to the state. How is that different from just handing it over to the nobles? The flag is different, right? They've got a new flag, and there's no czar, there's a Lenin instead. But has anything really changed for the peasants? Not so much, right? Their revolution has kind of changed one czar for another in terms of how they experience it, right? So again, they're not happy. And so what's the result of that? What's the result of that collectivization? After that, well, just in terms of like how does this kind of nationalization or collectivization of agriculture, how does it go?
Well, it doesn't go good. Like the efficiency that they expected, it just doesn't happen. They don't meet the demand of the government.
Yeah, and why not? Why don't they meet the demand of the government?
They don't have the motivation. And some of them were given their own like bit of land, 25 hectares.
Yep.
So they were paying attention more to those than
Yeah.
to the elected ones.
Right. And then, and why isn't there enough food kind of getting into the official channels? Yeah, black market. So what happens? Lenin collectivizes farms and says, okay, let's do this communist style, right? And the people are like, no, I don't want to do this. Now I'm supposed to work harder. I'm supposed to hand over my harvest to the government. Nothing has changed. I want to make some money. And so, yeah, what did they start doing? They start not paying attention to the collective farms. They start paying attention to their own little plots. They're selling that stuff privately on the black market for profit. And so what's happening? Well, again, there's not enough food, right? Because people are trying to like go around the system. They don't want collectivization. They don't want socialism. And so they're trying to not participate in that system, and they're trying to have a little capitalist economy on the side where they sell their harvest, right? So, okay, that's not going well, right? Number 12, I asked you about the civil war between the Bolsheviks and the White Army, but I think we already answered that, so maybe I'll just leave that alone for now. But number 13, yeah. Number 13 talks about Lenin's new economic policy, and it's a result of that collectivization not going very well, right? What is this new economic policy? Right, so he mixes in a little bit of capitalism, right? He mixes in a little bit of free market enterprise, if you will. So he tries this collectivization thing, right? He creates these big farms and says, okay, you all now work on this one farm, you work really hard, you collect the harvest, you send it all to the government, and the government will send you back what you need. And the peasants say, screw that noise, right? I'm not doing that. Instead, I'm going to pay attention to my own little plot. I'm going to grow as much food as I can. I'm going to sell it on the black market, and I'm going to use it to buy food. I did, or he did? We did?
Because the net comes before Lenin's death, the collectivization comes with Stalin.
Oh, I guess that's true. So I guess the nationalization of agriculture comes with Lenin, and that's his kind of first attempt to. I guess there's a little bit of collectivization going on in terms of, like, in spirit, what's happening, but you're right. Collectivization is something that's more associated with Stalin, and so maybe we should keep those terms separate, just so we don't get confused. But I think you're right. So.
And the net thing is about that they can have their own little businesses, less than 20 people.
Right. So yeah, so this new economic policy is Lenin's attempt to add a little bit of capitalism into the mix, right? So he tries to go full on socialist, full on communist. The peasants aren't having any of it, right? They're not interested. And so what does he do? He says, okay, I'm going to add back a little bit of capitalism, right? Small companies can operate on their own, right? And they can make a profit. People working on these farms, as long as you give the government a certain amount of the harvest, anything above that you can keep and sell on your own and keep the money, right? Yeah, there's taxes and there's quotas to be met, but if you go above that, you get to keep the surplus, right? And so he's trying to, as I say, get a little bit of motive in the people, give them the ability to sort of make some extra cash, which seems to be what they want to do. Does that work? Does it work?
Like they say a lot of NEP men started.
Right. So what are these NEP men?
New economic policy men.
Yeah, new economic policy men, and they mentioned kulaks as well, right? What's a kulak? Kulak.
The famous one is Duman.
Is what?
The one where Stalin sends people.
Yeah. Oh no. Well, the kulaks will come up in relation to Stalin for sure. But what's the definition of a kulak? What's a kulak? Say again?
There isn't really a definition.
How would you describe one based on what you read? I think it actually did define it, though. I think it did define it. Basically, what a kulak is a farmer who has enough land that they need to. Yeah, they need to. Yeah, was it land or wealth in excess of $800?
Yeah, excess of $800, or those who 150 days a year.
Right. So people who actually had control of land, they had some money in their pocket for whatever reason, and they had enough land that they needed to hire people to help them work it, right? And so these kulaks are kind of a little bit above the sort of regular peasants because they've got a bit of cash, they have a bit of land, they're hiring people to work on that land, and they're making some money, right? And so Lenin is saying with this new economic policy, hey guys, it's okay, you know, you can sell some of your produce on the black market, not on the black market, but on the market, as long as you meet quotas. If you're a kulak, that's okay, you're allowed to do this as well. If you're a small company, less than 20 people, you can operate for profit as well. Don't worry, right? So she adds in a little bit of capitalism back into the mix. And does it work? Yeah, seems to work, right? What did they say? By 1928, the economy had kind of recovered to pre-war levels, right? Yeah, which is not bad. Although in another way it is bad because pre-war, even then things weren't great, right? But at least they're not as bad as.
Yeah, it's between bad and worse.
Yeah, it's between bad and worse, but at least it's gone from worse to bad, which I guess is going in the right direction, right? So Lenin's new economic policy does manage to get some more food on the table for Russians and make things a little more bearable, right? Right. And then poor Lenin croaks, right? So he has a stroke, or I think a series of strokes or some such thing, and he's going to die in 1924, I believe, right? Yes. He's going to die in 1924. And so the question, of course, is who's going to replace him? Because he's been solely in control of the Communist Party, right? He's a powerful force. He is not to be crossed or toyed with, but now he is dead, and someone needs to step into his shoes. And there's a few kind of contenders for who might take control. And so there's kind of three factions or groups of people. Who are they, and what do they want? Yeah, no, Trotsky. You struggle with that one, eh? So there's Trotsky's kind of camp on one side, right? And he's on the left, I think, right? The leftists.
Yeah.
And so what does Trotsky believe in? What does Trotsky want? Or what does he believe? How does he feel about the new economic policy? Betrayal? Yeah.
He feels it like it's betrayal, and he wants others to have revolutions of their own.
Right. So first of all, he believes that Lenin's new economic policy, right? He's a full-on socialist, right? Trotsky. And so he doesn't want any of this capitalism stuff. He feels that, yeah, the new economic policy is a betrayal to the communist ideology. We don't need to do that. We need to be full-on socialist or full-on communist. And what does he believe for the rest of the world? Revolution, right? So he supports the idea that in order for the Soviet Union to be successful, other countries will have to switch to communism as well, right? So not only do they need to get socialism going in their own country, but they have to get it to happen abroad as well, right? They have to support and encourage communist revolutions in other countries. Okay, who's out on the right? So Trotsky's out on the left. Who's on the right? What? What's his name? Nikolai Buharin? Buharin. Buharin. Yes, and what's Buharin's thing?
He thinks that the revolution in other places is it's necessary, but not right now.
Right.
Some other time.
Right. So worldwide socialist revolution, yes, but maybe later, right?
And he what? The new economic policy as they say, let's say or something.
Yeah, and he says this new economic policy, yes, it's not pure socialism, but we kind of need it right now, right? This is a step, we're baby steps toward full socialism. We'll get there, but for now, this new economic policy is a good idea. It seems to be working, right? So we've got Buharin out on the right, we've got Trotsky out on the left, and who's in the center? Good old Joseph Stalin, right? And what's Stalin's thing? What does he believe? He believes in mustaches. I've got a picture of him without a mustache. And he is a handsome devil, let me tell you. Yes. I've shown this picture in class, and female students have swooned over him, which I know seems hard to believe, but it's true. Yes, you can. Actually, let me just see if I can show it to you here, since we're talking about it. Where's my picture of him? 22. There he is.
That's not him.
That is apparently him. He's a handsome devil, is he not? Ladies?
Where is that?
Huh?
What year is that?
I think he's pretty young. Do I have a card for him? Yeah, so 1878. It's probably the early 1900s there. So he looks pretty young, right? Like early 20s, mid 20s, maybe. Maybe. Look at that hair, though. Man, I'm envious of that hair. That's great hair. But anyway, he's going to turn out to be a monster. But he's pretty handsome at the moment. I think we can agree. What do you think, ladies? Handsome guy?
All monsters except the ones who rose in my country.
Eh?
Yeah, it's not that. It's not handsome.
No? He's okay? Amanda, what do you think of this guy? Okay? So? Okay. Maybe it's a personal taste thing, but I have had people swoon over Joseph Stalin. Right, and so what's Stalin's deal besides good hair? He's in the middle, right? So we've got Buharin out on the right, we've got Trotsky on the left, Stalin's in the center, and what does he believe?
So we gotta make it work here before we can tell the others to learn.
Yeah, so he has this idea of socialism in one country, right? We have to get it working here first, and then we can be kind of a leader for the world. We can be a beacon of communism once we kind of get things happening here in the USSR, right? And what else is he thinking about? Or what else does he manage to do in order to gain power?
What he does, well, he gets rid of trust.
Yes, he does.
He sent him to Mexico, then he kills him.
Yep. So Trotsky's going to get pushed out. He's going to get exiled eventually, and then Stalin's going to send somebody to kill him in Mexico. Brutal. What about Buharin?
Yeah, he's kind of like he's out of the picture. I don't remember how, but his supporters are locked up.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're locked up, but the way they describe it here, he kind of isolates him, right? So he manages to sort of push him aside and keep him from influencing the party, right? And so they say in the book that Stalin is Machiavellian. Do you know what that means? Do you know who Machiavelli is? No? No? You'll probably hear this term. We can talk about it for a second here, because you'll probably hear about people being Machiavellian or plans being Machiavellian. And it comes from an author, a Renaissance era author by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay? And he writes a few books, and the famous one he writes is called The Prince. And in The Prince, he describes what a good leader should be, right? If you want to be a good leader, this is how you do it. And basically what he does in the book is he says, he says this is what a good leader should be, but his version of a good leader, is a person who does whatever they have to do in order to maintain control of the country and to maintain stability. And it doesn't matter how kind of scheming you have to be. It doesn't matter if you have to kill people or lie or sort of go behind people's back or throw people under the bus. Whatever you need to do, that is justified in terms of maintaining power and maintaining stability for your country. He very well, in some ways, he very much was, right? And lots of people still are, right? And so the idea here is, I think we talked about it yesterday, the ends justify the means. Was that in this class or the other one? This class? Yeah, so to be Machiavellian is very much an ends justify the means. I think at one point, one of the things I remember from the Prince, the Machiavellian book, he says, if you really want to look like the savior of your country, put someone else in charge and make them be super brutal, right? So you appoint someone, to be in charge, right? This person is super brutal and they're awful and they're executing people, and then you come in, you hear of it, and you execute this person and say, I'm here and I'll save you now. And then you look great, even though you gave the orders in the first place. So, yeah, you use scapegoats, you use lies, you use misinformation, whatever allows you to stay in power and maintain stability for your country that's what you need to do. And
When was the Renaissance era?
about 1500s, 1400s, 1500s, yeah. So the book's a few hundred years old. It's actually worth a read. It's not very long, and I think you can find it. I think you can find it on. You can find it on like Amazon or, like for Kindle, or you can find it for Apple, and it's really cheap because Machiavelli is dead now, so he's not making any royalties. So it's actually really cheap if you want to read it. It's probably like a couple of bucks, and it's interesting to read, especially if you want to be Machiavellian in your everyday life.
Oh, I've seen those examples twice. I can do that.
Huh?
I've seen the live examples of this.
Sure. Where are we? Oh yeah. Okay, and so Joseph Stalin is going to emerge the winner of this kind of leadership contest, right? So he's dealing with Trotsky on the left and Buharin on the right. Trotsky wants to go full-on socialism in the USSR and worldwide revolution. Buharin is saying, well, worldwide revolution can wait. And also, for now, this new economic policy thing seems to be working. Let's ride that train for a little while, right? And Stalin is kind of in the middle. He wants socialism in one country, and he wants to inspire socialism abroad, but he's not too worried if other countries don't go there himself, right? And he, of course, is going to overturn the new economic policy and kind of impose socialism harshly, right? And so people are going to be collectivized. The Soviet Union is going to be socialist regardless of what has to happen. And that's what we'll deal with tomorrow. Yeah. Do you want to end it there before all the death starts? The death and the starvation and the people disappearing into gulags and genocides and yeah. Let's stop before we get to all the ugly stuff, okay? Okay, so that's all for today. Come back tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit about Joseph Stalin and his adventures in the Soviet Union. But until then, goodbye, and I'll see you tomorrow.